All right, let's talk tires. Tires are more than just round pieces of rubber connected to your bike. They're your connection to the trail. Tires give you the grip, control, and braking traction that you need to ride confidently. Your tires take a beating. They're one of the most important components on your bike, and they're also one of your most worn out components. When something new drops, like Schwalbe's new radial casing tires, you know they get people talking. They're calling this the biggest innovation in mountain bike tires in, well, ever. Sounds pretty enticing, doesn't it? So whether you're a weekend warrior, a hardcore racer, or you're just here for some nice bike shop banter, in this video, we are going to dive into the tech behind Schwalbe's new radial tires and see why you might want 60-year-old car tire technology on your mountain bike. And of course, we'll get out and ride these tires and see what we think. So let's go. So, why did Schwalbe create these radial tires? When you're riding your bike, and as long as you're staying upright, the tire should be the only thing in contact with the ground. It's actually a very small portion of this tire that's in contact with the ground, and then when you add in varied rough terrain like roots and rocks, that contact patch of your tire actually gets even smaller. Schwalbe set out to give you more rubber on the ground, to give you more grip, control, and confidence. Finger guns. One way to increase grip is to reduce your tire pressure, but this comes at a cost. With lower tire pressure, you're more likely to snake bite your tire and actually damage your rim. We saw the introduction of tire inserts to help mitigate some of these problems, but we all know how fun those are to install and deal with. Another potential solution for more rubber on the ground is changing the casing makeup of a tire. By removing casing layers in a tire, you can make your tire more flexible and therefore a bit more grippy on the trail, but this also has drawbacks like less sidewall support and less puncture resistance. With their new radial tire construction, Schwalbe claims to have remedied these two issues. No need of inserts and no reducing tire casings and giving you a flimsy tire. So let's dive into the tech behind radial tires. Most mountain bike tires are built using something called bias-ply construction. Now, what this is it means that the threads within the carcass of your tire, or the little fibers that make up your tire, because yes, your tire is made up of tiny little fibers, are laid at a 45-degree angle from bead to bead. And this typical construction gives tires required strength and lateral stiffness that we all know. On the other hand, radial tires, which have been typically found on cars, have threads that run closer to 90 degrees from bead to bead. So this allows the tire to flex more vertically, and you can think of that as like a spring absorbing impacts, kind of up and down. Schwalbe's new radial casing tire sits somewhere in between the 45-degree angle of a bias-ply construction tire and the 90-degree angle found on radial tires that you see on cars. Now, Schwalbe isn't telling us what exact angle that is at, because that's kind of the secret sauce to their radial tires that makes them so unique. But they have told us that it sits somewhere between 45 and 90 degrees. With increasing the angle of the threads, the carcass material overlaps for a shorter amount of time and creates less tension. This allows the tire to more selectively deform to varied terrain and unevenness, giving you more control. So what does this mean for your ride? Schwalbe claims that with these new radial tires, you will get a 30% larger contact patch. For example, let's say you have a Schwalbe radial tire set up at 21 PSI and you have a bias-ply construction tire set up at 21 PSI. If you were to roll them down the hill, put some pressure on them, the radial tire is going to have a 30% larger contact patch. And then if you took that radial tire, bumped the air pressure up to 28 PSI and kept the bias-ply tire at 21 PSI, you'd still have 10% more contact area with the radial tire. And that's pretty impressive. It's definitely something that's going to give you more grip and control. I don't know how many times I can say that. Grip and control. But let's be real, no technology is perfect, and there are gonna be some trade-offs. And that trade-off with the radial tires is going to be rolling resistance. Because you're gonna have more grip and more rubber on the ground, these tires could potentially feel a little bit slower in flatter terrain. Schwalbe did try and keep the sidewall construction the same, so they're nice stiff tires, but if you're pushing hard in corners, you might not feel that same lateral stiffness as a typical bias-ply construction tire. On the plus side, that flexibility means that you can run higher pressures and still maintain the same grip and comfort as your typical bias-ply construction tire. This design isn't just about performance though, it's also about simplifying your setup. Schwalbe is set out to make a tire that doesn't require the use of inserts like cush core in most situations, and they are still durable and burly enough to handle your everyday aggressive trail riding. So in a nutshell, Schwalbe's new radial tire technology is all about combining flexibility and durability. They've set out to create a tire that will give you more grip, more confidence, and more fun on your bike. We're gonna run through some of the new designs that Schwalbe has introduced with the radial tires, and then we're gonna get out on the trail and actually ride these things and see what they're all about. All right, so I've ran through some of the new tech behind these new Schwalbe radial tires, but I figured I would bring a couple of my coworkers in, BK and Joey, because they have actually both spent a little bit of time on these tires as well. And besides a whole new construction to these tires, they've also introduced 2 new tread patterns, which these guys have ridden. So I'm gonna start with you, BK, the new Albert tire. That is one of the new tread patterns. What's this guy all about?
Yeah, this Albert tread pattern was designed in conjunction with the radial technology, so it kind of makes the most of this tire's properties to conform to terrain. It does well in pretty much every condition, but I would say probably does the best on harder packed trails, just because it doesn't really have the knob height to dig in and bite, kind of like the Mary, and definitely not like the Shredda over there. But it's just predictable. It works well in most terrain, and I ran it front and rear and didn't have any gripes with it.
All right, so that is the Albert tire. They do have 2 casings available for this tire. So there is their Trail Pro and their Gravity Pro. Obviously the Gravity Pro is gonna be a thicker casing tire to get you more sidewall support, kind of similar to their old Super Gravity casing. So BK has ridden the Albert tire, but now we've got Joey, who is riding a very unique tire. You are riding their new Shredda tires, which are available in a front and rear specific tire. But besides that, these are kind of aimed more at the e-bike crowd, but you are not afraid of some big knobbed tires. So you've been running these on your analog bike. What is the Shredda all about?
All right, well, the Shredda is designed for the muddiest, kind of slipperiest, wettest, deepest conditions that you have out there. This time of year in Bellingham, we have almost nothing but those conditions. Now, my riding has been called by Rich as similar to his great-grandmother walking down an icy sidewalk. She also has cataracts, so slow and cautious. I decided that these tires would be like giving your grandmother micro spikes, all right? So these things kind of act like crampons on the trail. The amount of grip is ridiculous. And I like extra grip. I've never been on a trail ride and gone, oh, I wish I had less grip. My coworkers are often telling me, get a grip, Joey. So I threw these on and I was blown away by the traction. The first day I went out, it was pouring rain. We went out to ride on Chuckanut and I was like, I'm just gonna put these on my bike and see what happens. And it was amazing. Yes, they are designed for e-bikes. They are not lightweight. My bike is not lightweight. I don't mind going slow uphill. Going down is where all the fun is. So if I can have as much traction as possible, I'm happy. These tires made me happy.
Sweet, that definitely makes sense. It does get wetter around here in the winters. They are saying that this new Shredda tire, these blocks on it, are actually taller than the Dirty Dan, which was their previous bias-ply construction tire, meant specifically for wet weather riding. They do have different tread patterns. That's why there's a front and rear specific. And then again, these only come in the Gravity Pro casing because they figure most people, Joey not included, are gonna be throwing these on an e-bike. So weight's not as big of a concern. So definitely a sweet tire. I don't know that I would be scared to throw that Shredda rear on maybe my analog bike, like on the front.
I could see running these front and rear, the rears that is. This front is gnarly. It looks like a moto tire, but it provides endless traction. I have not had a front tire washout yet on this tire. Hopefully not in the future either.
Let's hope not. And these are available. The front is only available in a 29-inch, whereas the rear is 29 and 27.5 because most of those e-bikes we're seeing are mullet. And then the third tire is Magic Mary. This is one of my all-time favorite tires. I've ridden all of their bias-ply tires in the Mary in their super gravity casing. So with the radial tires, I will probably be throwing Marys in the Gravity Pro casing on my bike. I love this tire because, again, here in Bellingham, we have a lot of loose terrain and it's got a more open tread pattern than, say, that Albert. Like BK said, that's more of like an all-round tire. Whereas this guy has a real open tread pattern to shed mud and loose terrain, really dig into that loose stuff. So we're gonna get these on our bikes. These guys already have a couple sets on their bikes. I'm gonna put this on mine. We're gonna get out on the trail, give them a ride and see what we actually think. All right, so we're out of the studio. We are finally out on the trail, actually riding these new radial tires. It's winter time. It's kind of sloppy, slick. It is actually kind of sunny today, but trails are still damp. I admittedly am not riding a ton in the winters. So usually when I am riding, I'm a bit more timid. But I throw these radial tires on there and no joke, definitely feel more confidence inspiring, can feel that 30% more contact patch on the ground. So Joey, I want to start with you first though. You're running the Shreddas, which we had talked about in the studio, are geared more towards e-bikers, but you don't care. You're riding them on your analog bike. So what kind of tires were you riding before? What kind of pressures were you riding? And then what have you settled on the Shredda?
Yeah, so I usually would ride Specialized tires. I got a Hillbilly up front and a Butcher in the rear. I was often doing about 18 PSI on both of those, and I had Cushcore in the rear. On the Shreddas, I'm doing about 23 or 24 PSI up front and 25 or 26 in the rear. It's been pretty amazing.
That's crazy. That's like a huge, gap in the tire pressures, but do you feel like you're still getting the same grip?
I'm getting tons of grip. It's pretty remarkable how these tires do deform to rocks, to roots. Does remind me of the pelvic fin of the spiny lumpsucker. So it's this tiny little fish that has this fin that acts as like a suction plate and can adhere to anything, whether it's a rock, whether it's kelp, whether it's aquarium glass. And that's what these tires feel like. I rode stuff with you guys today that I normally wouldn't ride with tons of confidence, and that's awesome. The knobs on these are huge. When I first saw these, I was more excited than a tiger in a trundle bed. They just hook up everywhere you need them to. They might be a little slow going uphill, but I haven't really seen that as any sort of disadvantage because of the grip I get going downhill.
Okay. And that kind of transitions to BK. You are running the Alberts. It's definitely, in the studio, you'd mentioned kind of more of an all-around tire. I can definitely see some mud kind of in those spikes there, but what were you riding previously? I know you're a big fan of Specialized tires as well. What were you running pressures in those, and which ones were you running?
Yeah, kind of known as like the tire guy around the shop. I have an insane amount of tires just like piled up in the office. So this past year I've used Specialized, Maxxis, the original Schwalbe, and now the Radial. And right away you can tell that the Radial just deforms more. Like if you're going over an area that's a lot of jumbled rocks or roots, it's not that the tire is like squirming as much as just the face of the tire kind of gives, like that initial little like give on like suspension that's set up properly. The Albert tread pattern definitely gets a little overwhelmed when it gets wet out. It can pack up a little bit, but when it's hard pack or just firmer, dry trails, it does exceptionally well because it's built to work in conjunction with that radial technology. So whereas the Shredda has these massive knobs to penetrate the dirt, the Albert's idea is just get as much contact area with the trail as possible. So as it's deforming, you're just having all those knobs wrap around whatever the terrain is. So you just constantly have this feeling of predictable grip. I really like them. I think they definitely do get a little bit overwhelmed in the winter, and maybe you'll go for something like the Mary or the Shredda if you really want to get crazy. But for intermediate or dry conditions, the Albert's going to be an awesome choice.
Sweet. So might not be the tire that you're going to keep running this winter.
Yeah, probably not. But like as soon as it starts to dry out into spring and summer, especially like bike park season, where it's just kind of like that smooth, hard pack surface, I think these are going to do really well.
And then which casings are you running on that?
Yeah, so I started out with trail front and rear, and now I'm running trail up front and a gravity in the rear. I think the trail really does well up front because it gives so much. Like if you want to feel the difference of radial, go out and grab a side of the trail and it's going to be really evident. The gravity definitely has a little bit more support, has the feeling to be like less likely to give that squirm if you're like pushing through the tire, but still gives on like the surface, if that makes sense. Okay. So I think gravity in the rear, trail up front is kind of what I've settled on. But they're both going to be a great option.
Sweet. And yeah, this is my first time on the radials. I've always been a big fan of Schwalbe tires, and I've run their bias-ply tires, and I typically run a Mary up front and something like the Big Betty in the rear. Right now running a Mary gravity casing and an Albert gravity casing, and loving the combo. And I'm running 22 PSI up front and 24 in the rear, which is my like typical summer pressures. And I feel like I have way more grip in the winter. With the bias-ply tire, I'd usually run like 18 and 20. Yeah. But I'm 22, 24, and feeling like I've got more grip than those other tires. So we do have some questions from people on the internet about these tires and what they want to know. So what would you guys say the radial is for?
I'd say the radial tire is going to be best for people who want grip in all conditions, whether it's really dry and marbly or sloppy like it's out today. The way that casing works to just give you contact area on the ground is kind of unmatched right now in the industry.
I agree with that. If I could just kind of answer the opposite of that question, I would think if you're riding in an area with a lot of hard pack and you want a fast rolling tire that's just going to be speedy, lightweight cross country bike, maybe not. I could also see in certain conditions though where that would be awesome, having a super lightweight bike with a really grippy tire on there.
I know you probably wouldn't answer it, but what are the cons? And I really think kind of rolling resistance is probably the biggest con on these. Even when we were pedaling up, I was like, okay, I can definitely feel some additional drag in the rear of this bike. So if you're trying to go real fast, you're probably not choosing these tread patterns anyways, because these are more aggressive, downhill-oriented tread patterns. Yep. Another one, what kind of pressures should be used? We kind of hit on this, but...
Yeah, I don't think I talked about kind of what I've experimented with. When I started out, I went with my usual pressures of 22 in the front, 24 in the rear. And it's kind of shocking how it doesn't feel like 22 or 24. It feels like you're about 4 or 5 pounds under that, just doing the old-fashioned like tire squeeze test. So went up a little bit, and I've settled for 24 in the front and 26 or 27 in the rear. So just a couple PSI jump.
Yeah, I'm running a little bit higher pressure than usual. Last week I went on a ride just on our local hill, Galbraith, and I forgot to unlock my rear shock for the descent, and I didn't notice. So even with, at that time, it was 26 PSI, it still deformed and kind of absorbed a lot of that trail chatter that I was able to ride just about normally. I wouldn't recommend that for most riding, but it was pretty cool.
And then another was weight comparisons. Dylan, you weighed these in the studio, correct? You didn't. We'll weigh them in the studio, put that in the film. So not for the weight weenies. Is it better than the current super soft compound? I would say so. I've run kind of the super soft on some of the bias-ply Marys, and I think these definitely feel softer. And maybe that's just the tire deforming more, but the rubber definitely feels a bit softer. With the way that we've seen them selling at the shop, a lot of people are hopping on them because they're really excited about it. I think this is, bike technology is kind of slowed down, and this might be something very new and super exciting.
I don't upgrade my bike a lot. I don't spend a lot of money on it. I have had it set almost the same way for over 2 years now. And even the tires, I just kept buying the same ones. When these things came out, I was pretty excited. As my dad would always say, you catch more flies with dynamite. And putting things on the front was just like changing my bike so dramatically that it became more fun to ride. So is it a worthwhile upgrade? Oh yeah.
I'm lucky I get to try a lot of different products. Sometimes unreleased, sometimes stuff that just came out. And everybody's marketing copy is going to say it's the latest and greatest. But I would genuinely say that Radial technology is the first product I've tried recently where from the second I got on the bike, you could feel a difference. As soon as you start climbing up a trail that's familiar to yourself with similar pressures in there, you can feel how the changes they've made to the construction react out on trail. It's not one of those things where you're going to placebo yourself into thinking, oh, these are, the next best thing. You're going to feel it for yourself if you try them out.